He got 4 inmates pregnant, then turned up dead in the prison showers. But what shocked investigators more was how silent everyone stayed. On the morning of August 12, 2021, just before sunrise, the air inside Louisiana State Women's Correctional Facility felt heavier than usual. Guards moved about in practiced silence, radios crackling with half-sent messages, as the overnight shift handed off duties to the incoming team. At 6:27 a.m., a piercing alarm echoed from cell block F, triggering an emergency lockdown. The scene that unfolded in the next 15 minutes would shake the prison system to its core. Inside the communal shower room of the F Wing, a section designated for inmates under disciplinary supervision, Correctional Officer Marcus Deloyd was found lying motionless in a pool of his own blood. His throat had been slashed with a crude weapon fashioned from a broken mirror shard. The wound was clean, deep, surgical even. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, no security footage from the hallway leading in. The camera feed had gone dark for exactly 7 minutes. By the time paramedics arrived, Marcus was long gone. He was only 34 years old. And yet, the most shocking part of this case wasn't the violence. It was what came afterward. Within 48 hours of Marcus's death, an unrelated routine medical audit sent shockwaves through the prison system. 4 female inmates, Nina Cole, Shayla Banks, Tiffany Rowe, and Keisha Durant, were all confirmed to be pregnant. Not just pregnant, but each in varying stages, 3 months, 4, 5, and nearly 6. At first, staff suspected contraband, artificial insemination, or inmate-on-inmate assault. But when the state ordered mandatory paternity testing under suspicion of rape and staff misconduct, the results stunned everyone. All 4 unborn children had the same biological father, Marcus Deloyd. The headlines hit hard. Correctional officer impregnates 4 inmates, found murdered in prison showers. The Department of Corrections launched an immediate internal investigation. Prison warden Brenda Harris was placed under administrative review. Civil rights groups demanded answers. Families of the pregnant inmates threatened lawsuits. But behind closed doors, nobody had answers. Not yet. To the outside world, Marcus had the perfect profile. A clean-cut military veteran turned law enforcement officer. A man who volunteered with youth programs, helped coach Little League in his spare time, and smiled politely in every ID badge photo he ever took. He was popular among staff, even well-liked by many inmates. Charming, easy to talk to, one of the good ones, as some guards described. But that morning, the man who used to bring donuts to the night shift was lying face down in the women's shower, his neck slit clean through, eyes wide open under the flickering fluorescent lights. The optics were catastrophic. The media called him a predator in uniform. Advocacy groups questioned how a prison officer could impregnate multiple inmates under such tight supervision. What nobody knew at that point, what hadn't yet come to light, was how long Marcus had been playing this game, and how many people had let him get away with it. How could a single officer manage to impregnate 4 inmates, maintain their silence, manipulate an entire cell block, and then end up dead with 0 witnesses? And more importantly, who killed him? It wasn't just a scandal. It was a puzzle. And every time a piece seemed to fit, it raised another question. Was it one of the women he seduced? Was it a fellow officer who knew too much? Was it an orchestrated hit, an act of revenge? Or was it something darker, something systemic? One thing was clear. This wasn't just a crime of passion or a lapse in judgment. It was the collapse of an entire system of power, silence, and control. And as the days passed, one by one, the women at the center of it all began to speak, not with their mouths, but with their eyes, their silence, and their swollen bellies. Each one carrying a child, each one carrying a secret, but only one of them knew how Marcus really died. And she had no intention of telling anyone. Not yet. To understand what happened to Marcus Deloyd, you have to go back. Not to the day he died, but to the day he first walked through the gates of Louisiana State Women's Correctional Facility. It was October 2018, and Marcus arrived with clean credentials, polished boots, and that trademark confident smile. His transfer paperwork said he'd been relocated from a men's prison in Mississippi for administrative reallocation, a phrase that didn't raise too many eyebrows at the time. He fit right in, maybe too well. Marcus wasn't like most corrections officers. He didn't bark orders or stomp through cell blocks looking for trouble. He had a calm, calculated demeanor. He remembered names, asked inmates about their kids, smuggled in candy bars by mistake. When someone cried, he listened. To his co-workers, he was the one who actually gave a damn. But behind the smile, behind the respectful tone and southern manners, Marcus was already scouting, watching, choosing, and slowly, methodically, he began crossing lines. It started with Keisha Durant, a former gang affiliate with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She'd been in and out of juvie since she was 13 and didn't trust anyone in a badge. But Marcus wore her down. At first, he gave her extra rec time, then toothpaste, then cigarettes. Eventually, when no one was watching, he gave her his hands. By the time Keisha realized what she'd allowed to happen, it was too late. He convinced her it was special. He told her he could help her get early parole, maybe even put in a word with the warden. He never did. Tiffany Rowe, 27, had a history of addiction and sex work. Her past was a long stretch of bad choices and worse men. But Marcus treated her like a lady, until she was too attached to say no. Shayla Banks, 24, was the youngest of the group and the most vulnerable. A single mother with no family support, she was desperate to shave time off her 3-year sentence for shoplifting. Marcus promised he could make things happen if she stayed quiet and appreciated him properly. But it was Nina Cole who saw through the mask. At 38, Nina wasn't like the others. A former public school teacher convicted for embezzling PDA funds, she carried herself with quiet dignity and a lingering trace of pain in her voice. She didn't trust people easily, and she didn't flirt with officers. Marcus knew it, too. Still, he tried. He'd linger outside her cell, ask invasive questions masked as small talk, offer books from his personal stash, even slip her a granola bar once, just to make her day better. But Nina wasn't flattered. She was alarmed. She started documenting what she saw, writing things down. Names, dates, patterns. In a cheap spiral-bound notebook she kept hidden behind the toilet tank. What she was building wasn't a diary. It was evidence. Over time, Marcus stopped hiding. He grew bolder, confident. He knew the cameras in the F block were outdated. He knew the staff rotation left blind spots. He knew how to turn off hallway feeds for maintenance. He even learned to manipulate medical staff into signing off fake infirmary visits. And the women? He had them right where he wanted. Trapped, scared, pregnant. Each one too ashamed or afraid to speak out. Because in prison, the truth rarely sets you free. It just gets you punished. In 2020, a junior guard submitted an anonymous complaint citing inappropriate behavior between Marcus and female inmates. The note was vague. No names. No dates. It disappeared from the system within a week. Warden Brenda Harris, known for keeping a tight ship, chose not to escalate the issue. At least not officially. She liked Marcus. He made her job easier, and she had skeletons of her own. But whispers grew louder. One inmate claimed to be pregnant, then suddenly recanted. Another was moved to solitary without explanation. Staff turnover increased. Morale dropped. Marcus smiled through it all. What Marcus was doing wasn't about love. It wasn't even about sex. It was control. He carefully selected his targets. Women with no families, no legal support, no hope. He offered them slivers of kindness, crumbs of attention, and watched them cling to him like he was the last good man left in the world. In reality, he was engineering a system of silence and fear. And for nearly 3 years, he got away with it. Until one of those women decided enough was enough. By mid-2021, something changed. Marcus grew paranoid, more aggressive. He stopped smiling as often, snapped at inmates, checked his back. He noticed someone had been reading him too closely. Someone wasn't playing by the rules anymore. And deep down, he knew his time was running out. While Marcus continued to walk the prison halls with the illusion of control, Nina Cole was quietly building a case, one that could destroy him. Every glance, every interaction, every moment he lingered too long near his cell, she wrote it down. Not in anger, not even in fear, but with cold, methodical purpose. At night, she hid the notebook in the lining of her mattress. During head count, she tucked it behind the old radiator in the laundry room. It became her shield, her secret, but she wasn't the only one watching. Keisha Durant had started to notice things too. Unlike Nina, Keisha didn't need evidence. She had experience. She could smell a man's lies like smoke. And she didn't trust Marcus. Never had. The only reason she gave in to him was because she felt cornered, alone. But now her body was changing. Her belly had started to swell. And with every passing week, the shame turned to rage. One night, during a shift change, Keisha caught Nina by the stairwell, pressing her notebook tight against her chest. "You writing about him?" Keisha asked, low and sharp. Nina didn't answer, just looked her in the eye and said, "Do you want to see what happens if we stay quiet?" Keisha nodded once. That was the beginning. Elsewhere in the prison, Tiffany Rowe had begun to spiral. She still believed Marcus cared about her. He used to brush her hair back behind her ear and call her darling when no one was around. But now, when she called his name from her bunk, he barely looked. When she asked him about his promises to get her transferred, to write that letter to her parole board, he shrugged her off. He had what he wanted, and she had a baby growing inside her. Tiffany cried into her pillow at night, muffling the sound. But it didn't stop the other women from hearing. Even Shayla Banks, the youngest, the quietest, started to see the truth. At first, she thought her pregnancy meant something, that maybe she'd finally found a man who would protect her. But when she asked Marcus what they would do next, he laughed. "Dude," he said, "you're doing just fine right where you are." Then he walked away. The four women never planned a meeting. They didn't sit in a circle and plot revenge. That's not how it works behind bars. But the air changed. The silence between them turned into shared glances, subtle nods, tense conversations whispered through vents and passed along in folded notes. One note said, "He's done this before. You're not the first. You won't be the last." Another said, "We're not helpless. Don't forget that." But it wasn't until Nina's notebook disappeared that everything truly began to unravel. It was a Wednesday. Morning inspection came early. Guards stormed in, shouting for inmates to stand back and keep their hands visible. They tore through bunks, flipped mattresses, opened lockers, dumped trays. And when they reached Nina's cell, she already knew something was wrong. Her heart dropped. The notebook gone. She kept her face still. She said nothing. But that night, while scrubbing floors in the janitorial closet, she found a single torn page from her notebook stuck under the sink, damp and smudged. One word still legible. Marcus. That was all the confirmation she needed. He'd found it, and he knew. From that moment on, Marcus changed. He wasn't charming anymore. He was twitchy, cold. His compliments turned into threats. He told Keisha she'd be moved to solitary if she kept looking at him funny. He told Shayla that if she even thought about filing a grievance, her food privileges would disappear. He called Tiffany needy. He asked Nina if she liked being a snitch. But most of all, he watched them, like a man surrounded. He walked faster, ate alone, checked his shoulder in empty rooms. When he passed by the medical wing, he peeked into the trash to see if pregnancy tests were being disposed of. When a new officer joined the night crew, Marcus cornered him during break and warned him to stay out of F Block. And still, he didn't stop, because deep down, Marcus believed he was untouchable. What he didn't know was that someone was already working from the inside to prove him wrong. Late one night, Keisha left a toothbrush handle behind a radiator in the common room. The next day, it was gone. In its place, a small mirror shard wrapped in tissue. She never saw who made the exchange. She didn't ask. The women didn't speak openly, not even to each other. But they knew. They knew when he was most vulnerable. They knew his routine. Every Tuesday morning, Marcus turned off the camera near the shower area for scheduled maintenance checks. No one questioned it. It was something he'd done for over a year. They also knew that Marcus never carried a radio when he entered that part of the building. He liked his privacy. And in prison, privacy can be fatal. By the end of July, the air had grown still. The glances had turned to glares. The fear had turned to calculation. One of the four women, maybe Keisha, maybe Nina, had decided it was time. And in the quiet, echoing halls of F Block, a plan began to take shape. One that didn't need words, just timing, and a single, sharp edge. August 10th, 2021. The heat in Louisiana had settled like a heavy blanket over the prison. Even inside the concrete walls of the facility, the air was thick and unmoving. Tempers ran high. Sweat clung to every surface. And deep in F Block, the tension was no longer just emotional. It was palpable. Marcus Deloyd's steps echoed through the corridor that morning, same as they always had. Clipboard in hand, keys at his hip, that same practice smirk on his face. He was in control, still in charge. But even Marcus couldn't ignore the change in how the inmates looked at him now. No more giggles, no soft smiles, just stares. Cold, focused. As he passed Keisha's bunk, she didn't speak. She just watched, unblinking. He moved past Tiffany. She turned her back. Nina sat silently near the window, pen in hand, not writing, just waiting. Shayla wasn't even in her cell. She was helping clean the infirmary, assigned there after her last medical visit confirmed she was in her second trimester. Marcus's jaw tensed. Something was off. He could feel it, but he was too arrogant to act on instinct. August 11th. Marcus submitted a brief maintenance request to disable shower hall camera number 3 for lens fogging. The paperwork was signed off automatically, no questions asked. It wasn't unusual. The camera had been going in and out for months. He'd exploited that fact plenty of times before. His calendar said he'd be inspecting the plumbing in F Block South shower room at 6:30 a.m. the following day. It was routine, standard, boring. But this time it wouldn't be. August 12th, 6:21 a.m. He entered the shower area alone. No radio, no backup. The flickering lights buzzed above, casting long shadows across the damp tile. Steam clung to the mirrors, even though no water was running. Marcus removed his gloves, placing them neatly on the small bench by the door. What happened next took less than 5 minutes, but would haunt the facility for years. A figure moved from the corner. She was barefoot, quiet, and she wasn't alone. Another shape stepped out from behind the divider, holding a rag soaked in warm water and lye. Prison-made cleaning solution strong enough to burn skin. A third stood near the shower knobs, pretending to adjust the pipes, then silently locked the door behind them. Marcus turned. He didn't scream. Maybe he knew. Maybe in that final second, he understood this was never about rage. It was about reclaiming power. The first blow caught him just under the chin, a flash of silver, a jagged edge slicing clean across the flesh. He staggered, grabbed at his throat, but the blood came fast. Too fast. He fell against the tiles, coughing, gurgling. The echo of his body hitting the floor was louder than any cry for help. The rag hit next, across his eyes, pressed hard, searing chemicals blinding him instantly. His legs kicked weakly. His hands flailed once. Then he was still. They didn't stay long. One whispered, "You won't hurt anyone else." Another opened the drain to let the blood flow out. When the guard rotation arrived 15 minutes later, the water had already diluted most of it. Marcus lay face up, eyes wide open, lips parted as if trying to form one last word. But it never came. The entire prison went into lockdown. Sirens blared. Inmates were ordered to their bunks. Every inch of F Block was searched. Guards shouted. Dogs barked. Medical teams swarmed the shower hall. Warden Brenda Harris arrived in under 10 minutes, pale as ash, demanding answers. But there were none. No one saw a thing. No one heard a thing. And, perhaps most surprisingly, no one confessed. As the investigation began, authorities realized the camera feed from shower hall camera number 3 had cut out exactly at 6:22 a.m. and didn't resume until 6:31. 9 minutes. Long enough to kill. Long enough to vanish. Fingerprint testing revealed nothing unusual. DNA samples were inconclusive. There were too many overlapping traces. In a communal prison shower, that wasn't surprising. No weapons were found. The murder weapon, likely a sharpened piece of glass or plastic, was flushed or destroyed. It was as if the act had been rehearsed, executed, erased. Detective Raymond Grant was brought in by the state to assist. A seasoned investigator known for his cold demeanor and relentless digging. He stood over Marcus's body that afternoon and asked the question everyone else was afraid to. Who wanted him dead? The answer was simple. Almost everyone. Back in F Block, the atmosphere had changed. Not with fear, but with relief. Inmates didn't celebrate. They didn't cheer. They just sat quietly, as if a storm had passed. A silent nod passed between Nina and Keisha that morning. A look of understanding, of closure. Tiffany cried in her bunk, but not for Marcus. For herself, for her child. And Shayla? She went back to folding laundry like it was any other Thursday morning. But they all knew. The predator was gone. And now came the consequences. Detective Raymond Grant had seen his fair share of prison deaths, suicides staged as accidents, overdoses no one talked about, even the occasional revenge stabbing in the yard. But this was something different. From the moment he stepped into Louisiana State Women's Correctional Facility, he could feel it. The silence wasn't normal. The cooperation felt rehearsed. Everyone said the right things, but they said them too quickly, too precisely. And no one cried for Marcus Deloyd. Raymond was a former homicide detective out of Baton Rouge, brought in by the state to serve as an independent investigator. He was 57, grizzled and blunt. He didn't care about prison politics or covering anyone's backside. His job was to find out how a corrections officer ended up with his throat slit in a maximum security facility, and why no one seemed all that surprised. His first move was simple. He went to camera number 3. The report said the feed cut out due to a technical issue. He raised an eyebrow the moment he read it. Too clean. Too easy. He had the IT team pull the server logs. No evidence of a power surge. No corrupt files. No glitch. Someone had turned the camera off, manually. And only one person had the authority and code access to do that on a random Thursday morning. Marcus Deloyd. Back in the security office, Raymond pulled his chair up to the monitor bank and asked the tech to rewind 48 hours. He watched Marcus's movements on August 10th, then the 11th, same routine. Clipboard, coffee, smile. But what caught his attention wasn't what Marcus was doing. It was what the inmates weren't doing. No interaction, no nods, no whispers, just blank stares, unflinching, unified. Raymond had been in law enforcement long enough to know what that meant. They weren't afraid anymore. And that only happened after one of two things. Someone powerful was gone, or someone worse was coming. He reviewed the medical records next. For pregnancies, all within 6 months of each other. For different inmates. For identical DNA matches. Marcus had been careful. None of the women had filed complaints. There were no rape kits, no grievance forms, no visible bruises or signs of violence. But when Raymond pulled the transcripts of the inmates' recorded conversations with family and lawyers over the past few months, he found something strange. They were all eerily neutral. No one mentioned Marcus. No one mentioned fear. Not a single word about being pregnant. He'd seen this before, with trafficking victims, with long-term abuse survivors. It wasn't silence. It was programming. He decided to speak to them, one by one. First was Tiffany Rowe. She was 6 months along, eyes puffy, voice flat. Raymond offered her a bottle of water and told her he wasn't there to hurt her. He just wanted the truth. Tiffany smiled, a small, sad twitch of her lips. He said he loved me, she said. But he stopped looking at me once I started showing. Raymond asked her if Marcus had ever threatened her. She shook her head, then paused. He didn't have to, she whispered. He just made you believe things. Like maybe this was your best option. Next was Shayla Banks. Barely 24, she looked like a teenager in her oversized jumpsuit. She kept her hands on her stomach the whole time. Raymond asked her how she ended up pregnant. She stared at the floor. I let him, she said, because I thought he'd help me get home to my little boy. Did he ever promise you that? Raymond asked. She nodded. Once. Then tears slipped down her cheek. He lied. Keisha Durant wasn't emotional. She wasn't scared. She was angry. She sat across from Raymond, arms crossed, jaw tight. You think I killed him? She asked. I think someone did, Raymond replied. She leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Well, it wasn't me, she said. But if you're looking for people who wanted him dead, I'd start with your own staff. Raymond tilted his head. You think someone helped? I think, Keisha said, voice cold. He made enemies in every hallway of this place, uniform or not. Then there was Nina Cole. She was calm, almost too calm. Raymond knew right away she was the one to watch. When he asked if she had any information about Marcus's death, She didn't flinch. "I know he's dead," she said. "And I know there are women here who are finally sleeping through the night again." Raymond asked her about a notebook. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "What notebook?" "You tell me." She didn't respond. But Raymond could tell she knew a lot more than she was saying. By the end of the week, Raymond had no confession, no murder weapon, no smoking gun. But he had something better. Motive, pattern, silence. A powerful man who exploited his position for vulnerable women. And a perfectly timed window of opportunity created by a camera glitch that only he could authorize. It didn't take a genius to see what had happened. But proving it in court? That was a different story. Raymond submitted his report with the following conclusion. The death of Officer Marcus Deloyd appears to be a targeted act of retaliation by one or more individuals subjected to sustained abuse. Due to lack of physical evidence and the unified silence of all potential witnesses, the case remains unsolved. Recommendation: administrative overhaul of facility surveillance and internal affairs processes. The warden signed it. The prison board closed it, and the file was shelved under unsolved, no further action. But Raymond kept a copy for himself, because cases like this, they didn't go cold. They just went quiet. The official report labeled it unsolved. The media moved on after a week. The headlines faded. The outrage dimmed. But inside Louisiana State Women's Correctional Facility, the ripple effect had only just begun. Warden Brenda Harris returned to work 2 weeks after Marcus's death, trying to act like things were under control. But she wasn't fooling anyone. She'd signed off on the maintenance forms that gave Marcus access to the disabled cameras. She dismissed the anonymous complaint a year prior. She'd been warned, and she'd ignored it. Now the eyes of the Department of Corrections, civil rights groups, and even federal watchdogs were fixed directly on her office. An internal audit revealed dozens of irregularities. Inmate grievances that mysteriously disappeared. Disciplinary transfers done without proper documentation. Security footage gaps recurring at oddly consistent intervals, especially when Marcus was on shift. The audit team found one report buried in an old file drawer, a short, handwritten note from a junior guard dated 6 months before the murder. It simply said, "Deloyd spends too much time alone with certain inmates." Something's wrong here. The report had never been processed. Brenda claimed she must have overlooked it, but no one was buying that anymore. By the end of September, Warden Harris was placed on indefinite suspension. A month later, she quietly resigned. No charges were filed. No public apology was made. Just a signed NDA and a generous pension. Another name slipped out of the headlines. Another system quietly protecting its own. But what couldn't be swept under the rug were the pregnancies. For inmates, for children, and a storm of questions. Should the babies stay with their mothers? Were the pregnancies a result of assault? Was this a human rights violation? Public opinion was split. Some said the women were complicit, that they used Marcus for their own benefit. Others, including advocates and trauma experts, called it coercion through power dynamics. In prison, consent is never clear. And when you're offered favors in exchange for your body, it's not love. It's survival. Tiffany Rowe gave birth to a baby girl in December. She named her Autumn, after the season she used to love before her life went off track. Autumn was taken by the state after 48 hours. Tiffany cried the whole time, holding her baby close until the very last minute. "I didn't do everything right," she whispered, "but she's the one thing I did." She never saw her again. Shayla Banks had a difficult labor. Her baby boy was born premature and spent the first month in NICU. She named him Noah, a retired nurse whose own daughter had died from opioid overdose, volunteered to foster him. She visited Shayla once a month, brought pictures, told her how Noah was growing strong. It was the only joy Shayla had left. Keisha Durant gave birth silently. No screams, no tears. She didn't name her child. Didn't ask where the baby was taken. Didn't want to know. Later, she told her new cellmate, "That kid deserves better than anything I could give." She went back to her old rhythm, push-ups, reading, and keeping everyone at arm's length. But her eyes? They never softened again. And then there was Nina Cole. She gave birth in May. A girl. Healthy. Quiet. She named her Elise. after her grandmother. Nina's sister filed for custody and won. Every month, she sent Nina a photo, a letter, a short update. Nina responded with poetry, verses she scribbled on prison-issued paper, folded carefully, sent with stamps she bartered for with extra laundry duty. She told her sister, "Raise her to be fierce. Raise her to be free." In the background, whispers persisted that someone else had helped commit the murder. A guard, maybe, or even Brenda Harris herself, trying to cover her own tracks. But no charges were ever filed. No new suspects. No names made public. It remained a ghost story inside the prison walls. A tale told in low voices in the laundry room, the library, the cafeteria. Don't cross the wrong people, or you'll end up like Deloitte. Detective Raymond Grant moved on to other cases, but he never forgot the look on Nina's face when he asked her about the notebook. Years later, he would still think about that prison. Not because justice had been served, but because someone had taken justice into their own hands, and no one had dared to stop them. He kept the case file in a box in his study, marked only with 2 words. Power fails. Outside the prison, the world kept turning. But inside those concrete walls, for children had been born of silence, manipulation, and survival. And whether they would grow up haunted or healed was a question no report could ever answer. 14 years later, a warm spring breeze rolled through New Orleans, carrying the scent of magnolia trees and wet sidewalks. It was a beautiful April morning, the kind that made the past feel far away. But for Elise Cole, the past was never far. It lived in the whispers of her aunt's careful explanations. It lived in a locked drawer in the hallway desk, where a stack of yellowed prison letters lay bundled in twine. It lived in the face she saw in the mirror, a little of her mother, a little of the man she never knew. At 14, Elise was curious. By 16, she was angry. At 18, she made a decision. She would find out who her father really was, and why no one ever talked about him. Her aunt had tried to protect her. Nina was brave, she said. She survived things no one should have to survive. But Elise didn't want survival. She wanted truth. So she started digging. Old news archives, state records, a visit to the Louisiana Department of Corrections Public Affairs Office under the pretense of doing a college research paper on systemic abuse in women's prisons. And that's where she found it. The name, Marcus Deloitte. The headline, Prison Officer Murdered After Impregnating 4 Inmates. Case remains unsolved. Elise stared at the screen. A chill ran through her. She printed everything she could find. That night, she waited until her aunt fell asleep, then opened the drawer with a hairpin and began to read. There it was, in her mother's own words. He smiled like he owned the place, like we were property. I couldn't let it keep happening. We couldn't. There was no confession. But Elise didn't need one. She understood now. Her mother hadn't been a victim of passion. She'd been a prisoner of power, and she'd fought back. A month later, Elise enrolled in criminal justice courses at Loyola University. She focused on carceral reform. She gave speeches, wrote essays, and on her 21st birthday, she did something no one expected. She submitted a formal petition to the State Review Board requesting the reopening of the Deloitte case. The request caught fire online. The daughter of one of Marcus's victims asking the state to reconsider the death of the man who fathered her. The media loved it. Some called her brave. Others called her confused. But Elise didn't care. She had one goal, to make sure what happened in 2021 never happened again. Detective Raymond Grant was 71 when he got the call. Someone's asking about Deloitte, the voice said. It's the daughter of one of the inmates. Raymond sat in silence for a long time after he hung up. He hadn't looked at that file in over a decade, but the box was still there. Still marked, Power Fails. He opened it slowly, the paper brittle now, his notes fading at the edges. He reread his old summary. The silence around Marcus Deloitte is more damning than any confession could ever be. He made one call, then another. 3 weeks later, he sat across from Elise Cole at a small cafe off Canal Street. You look like her, he said. She taught me to see things as they are, Elise replied. Not as people want them to be. Raymond nodded. I never could prove it, he said. I knew what happened. I just couldn't prove it. I don't need proof, Elise said. I just want the truth on record. Raymond looked her in the eye. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a faded folder. I think it's time someone finally told it. With Raymond's help, Elise filed a Freedom of Information Act request and uncovered suppressed documents. The original internal complaint that had vanished. Notes from counseling sessions with inmates that had been sealed. A maintenance log showing camera manipulation across 4 separate dates, all tied to Marcus. The evidence didn't convict a killer, but it convicted a system. The state launched a formal inquiry into the 2021 case. New interviews were conducted, though most of the inmates had been released or transferred. Tiffany Rowe was living in Georgia, working as a clerk at a motel. Shayla Banks was in California, attending AA meetings and helping other single mothers. Keisha Durant had vanished. No known address. And Nina Cole? She had passed away 2 years earlier for breast cancer. But she left behind a recorded message on a USB drive in her daughter's name. Elise played it in a silent room. If you're listening to this, baby girl, then you went looking for something. Just know, I loved you before you even opened your eyes. And I did what I had to do, not to survive, but so you could live. He hurt people. He thought we were his to control. And when the system failed to protect us, we protected each other. Justice didn't come in a courtroom, but it came. And you're my justice. Elise sat for a long time, letting the words settle. Then she wiped her tears and stood up. She wasn't angry anymore. She was ready. In 2037, the Deloitte case was officially reclassified by the state of Louisiana as a consequence of systemic institutional failure and protected sexual exploitation. It was the first time a state publicly acknowledged a prison murder as a byproduct of ongoing abuse, not an isolated crime. No one in jail. But things changed. Laws were passed. Surveillance protocols were overhauled. And Elise Cole? She became one of the youngest commissioners ever appointed to the Louisiana Commission on Prison Oversight. She didn't carry her father's name. She carried her mother's fight. The day Elise Cole took her seat at the Louisiana State Capitol for the signing of the Prison Protection and Reform Act, the air was crisp, the chamber packed, and every camera pointed directly at her. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a lawyer. She was the daughter of an inmate. The daughter of a man whose name would never be cleared and never be honored. And she was perfectly okay with that. The law she helped champion established mandatory third-party oversight in all female correctional facilities across the state. It required real-time camera backups, anonymous reporting protocols, and strict limitations on one-on-one interactions between guards and inmates, especially those of opposite sex. For some, it was too little, too late. For others, it was a turning point. For Elise, it was a promise fulfilled. That night, she walked the halls of her quiet apartment in Baton Rouge. The photos on the wall showed her mother's soft smile, her aunt's proud eyes, her graduation cap. But the one that always caught her gaze was the framed piece of prison paper, her mother's first letter to her. They say I'm locked away, but I promise you, nothing can cage a mother's love. Elise knew she would never meet Nina again. Not in this life. But she didn't need to, because everything Nina had once lost, her voice, her safety, her story, had been reclaimed. And Elise was the one who carried it. Across the state, the prison where it all began sat half-abandoned. Louisiana State Women's Correctional Facility had been shut down 3 years earlier, its funding cut, its record under review. Some said it was haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories. The empty cell blocks echoed with forgotten names. The yard was overgrown, but inside one of the old administrative offices, a plaque remained. Faded, scratched. Correctional Officer Marcus Deloitte, Service, 2015 to 2021. Someone had scribbled over the words with a marker long ago. Now it's simply read. He thought no one would talk. We spoke in silence. Of the 4 children born from that prison nightmare, each had taken a different path. Noah Banks became a social worker in Oakland, helping young men of color navigate trauma and incarceration. Autumn Rowe struggled with anxiety and depression in her teenage years, but found peace in photography. Her black and white portraits of prison architecture were displayed in a gallery titled, Where My Story Began. Keisha's child, whose name was never shared, was adopted at birth. No trace remained. No records were public. And maybe that was for the best. And Elise? She became the face of a movement she never asked to lead. But she did it anyway. In a television interview on the anniversary of her mother's death, the host asked her, "Do you think justice was ever served?" Elise paused, then smiled. Not in the way most people think. We didn't get a trial. We didn't get a confession. But we got the truth. And we turned it into change. She looked into the camera. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes from the quiet places, the ones no one wants to look at. Somewhere in a dusty corner of a retired detective's home, the file marked "Power Fails" remained untouched. Raymond Grant had passed away the year prior. His obituary made no mention of the Deloitte case. But his grandson found the box and read every page, then kept it, because stories like that, they don't belong in archives. They belong in the hands of people who will remember. And in a final twist of fate, the notebook Nina Cole once hid behind a radiator, the one that vanished, the one everyone thought was lost, was found during demolition of the prison's F block. Water damaged, torn, but still legible. Inside, on the very last page, scrawled in pencil so faint it nearly faded. We didn't kill him because we hated him. We killed him because we knew no one else ever would. The discovery was never released to the public. Elise saw it in private, in a back room of State Archive office. She read the words over and over. Then she handed it back and said, "Let's stay there. The world doesn't need revenge stories. It needs redemption." That night, she lit a single candle on her windowsill. For Nina, for Tiffany, Shayla, Keisha, for the children who had no choice, and for the power of silence broken by action. Because when the system failed, they didn't.